Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is Joe Tries Art. Of course, that means I am Joe, and today we're going back to the presidents, which means it's time for president number 6, John Quincy Adams. He was president from 1825 to 1829 and was the eldest son of the second president of the United States, the man we drew a few months ago, John Adams. Again, I am working off of the portraits that appear on Wikipedia's lists of the President of the United States. So this portrait that I'm looking at as a reference is by a man named Charles Osgood. It is a much different portrait and has a much different feel than the last one we did of James Monroe. This is much more traditional, it is much more stoic, and it is none of that kind of romantic style that Monroe's portrait had. Now, I have to admit, I know very little about these two men, but it does make me wonder if the portraits they chose, reflect anything about them personally and about their personalities and things. I think that would be kind of interesting to look into at some point. But I'm not doing that today. I am just drawing the portrait. So here we go. Hope you enjoy watching it take shape. I will talk to you at the end. Well, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. John Quincy Adams, or at least my attempt at Mr. John Quincy Adams. Overall, I'm a little torn on this particular one, just because overall I think it's a pretty good likeness. I think it looks like him for the most part, except for a few things. And the first thing is proportions are kind of coming back to bite me again. I didn't block this one out like I have in some of the other ones, mainly because I sort of forgot to. I had sort of gotten going before I thought of it, and then by that time I was just like, oh, I'll just do it. But you may have noticed at the beginning I went back and I had to erase his chin line and sort of redraw that. That's because I realized his head wasn't quite long enough. And then about halfway through, at least past the point where I couldn't really fix it anymore without probably having to just go back and start over again, I realized it still wasn't long enough. And that meant that his face was squat, which means his nose isn't long enough, which means that the space between his nose and his mouth isn't big enough, which obviously affects how it looks, and would definitely make a big difference if I changed it or redrew it. The other thing I think is a little more abstract, and that's because in Osgood's portrait, at least, for lack of a better term, he has a very almost bird-like quality to him, where his nose and his eyes and even his mouth, to a certain extent, kind of come to a point, if that makes any sense. And that was hard for me to sort of duplicate. I think his eyes are the right size. I think they're in the right place. I think his nose obviously could be a little bit longer, but it still doesn't quite have that pointed quality, and I was struggling to capture that. And that's, I don't know if that's just technique or if that's really has something to do with sort of trying to capture it in pencil, what's painted in oil, or I don't really know. but it was just something that I couldn't quite capture, which he saw me fiddling with it, I'm sure, where I would come and work on a little bit, then go work on something else, and never really got to the point that I liked it, but also didn't get to the point where I thought I was making any progress. So that's where we are. Overall, I think it's decent, obviously, but there are things that can improve on it, and that's just sort of the process. But I think it's good enough that this is where we're going to leave Mr. John Quincy Adams, and we will move on. And thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments or anything like that, please let me know. And please subscribe so you can come back and see what I try next. Thank you very much. Goodbye.